Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance. I'm your host, Chaz Andres, and as always, we're going to get started this week with the news. The biggest story, though, well, there really wasn't one big story. There are a couple of smaller things I'd like to cover, including the mystery of the Boros Soldiers deck. See, this weekend at Magic Fest Toronto, which was a big Modern tournament, what we formerly called a Grand Prix, there was a Boros Soldiers deck that finished day one at 9-0. And because there was no video coverage of this event, or probably any Magic Fest going forward, we just didn't know it was in this list. So all day on Saturday, the internet was abuzz. What is Boros Soldiers? As it turned out, Boros Soldiers was basically a mono-white aggro deck with some red splashes, nothing all that exciting. But because the deck got a ton of hype and 9-0 on day one is still 9-0 on day one, I do expect there to be at least a little bit of Magic Finance action to come out of this deck. My pick right now is Field Marshal. Field Marshal is cheap as free on MTGO. It has a lot lower supply than a lot of the other cards in this list, so hey, I'd at least consider picking some of these up. It's possible that, the spike has already happened by the time you watch this video, or it's possible there's not going to be a spike at all, but free cards are free cards, and when something is worth 0.1 of a ticket, well, I'd at least add a few to my cart just in case. Second, there are real organic signs that the Modern market is finally starting to trend up, both in paper and in MTGO. In fact, if you take a look at the MTG Goldfish Price Index for Modern staples, you can see that the MTGO index is up about 5% week to week. That is, well, it's not a ton, considering prices in Modern are still pretty low on Magic Online, but it's not nothing, and it is real growth across the entire index, not just a single deck or a handful of staples leading the charge. I'd also like to point out that there are some really strong rumors that I tend to believe that in about 2 weeks, Wizards of the Coast is going to announce a brand new Modern exclusive expansion. Think Modern Masters, but half reprints and half brand new cards that are legal in Modern. And if this happens, the Modern Index is going to go crazy. People are going to be buying all kinds of staples as new cards are previewed, and they can't wait to try out new decks that are going to shake up the format in pretty significant ways. So that's all me saying, this is time to buy. If you're interested in buying Modern on MTGO, here's your opportunity. Let's move on now to Gaining Ground, where despite not really having a tier 1 standard deck, the standard legal card that gained the most ground this week was yet again Arclight Phoenix, climbing 7 more tickets from 32 up to 39. So what's going on here? Well, I think part of it has to do with Saffron Olive, who showed out a really cool looking mono red Phoenix deck on stream last week, and I think another part is it Phoenix in Modern, which is currently the most played deck in the entire MTGO Modern metagame. Regardless, I was straight up wrong when I said that this card would drop in price once people realized that it didn't have a top tier standard option anymore. People really want to play with this Phoenix across all formats, and this demand is definitely very organic and very genuine. That said, I'm still probably selling into the hype. I mean, Saffron Olive is going to move on to another fun card at some point soon, and, well, Guilds of Ravnica, it's going to leave the set redemption window at the end of the month, and we all saw what that did to Core Set 2019. I don't know though, this card keeps going up in price, the price chart just keeps ticking up toward 40, might even pass 40 next week, so I guess use your own judgment here. I think short term, I'm probably expecting Arclight Phoenix to continue rising. Longer term, I'm a lot less sure. Let's move over to Modern now, where our biggest gainer of the week was Surgical Extraction, gaining about 8 tickets from 31 up to 39. And if you watched last week's video, you know that last week this was our biggest Modern loser, but I said that the rebound would probably happen fairly quickly. I really thought back then that the only reason this card tanked in price was because people were selling the most valuable card they had in Modern in order to buy Hydroid Crasises and other expensive new standard staples, and that if the Modern market really was rebounding like I thought, Surgical Extraction would probably be one of the first cards to be a part of that rebound. That's exactly what seems to have happened. It's back up to 39, it's continuing to rise. My guess is that this one will be back up at 45 again before long, and that's a good sign for Modern overall. Let's move on now to our biggest loser. We're over in Standard, it's old friend Vivien Reid again. What a weird card this is. See, Vivien dropped from 20 all the way down to 7 once Core Set 2019 left the set redemption window, and then it climbed from 7 all the way back up to 17 once people realized that it was one of the best mythics in Standard, and now it's back down to 9, despite still being one of the best mythics in Standard. This card has this crazy roller coaster price chart that, well, I never want to ride a roller coaster that looks like that, let me tell you. But yeah, Vivien Reid is still a 3 of Mythic and Sultai mid-range, which is still the best deck in Standard. And I get that a lot of Standard play has moved over to Arena at this point, and that is going to continue to happen. But if any Standard Mythic is going to be at least 10 tickets on MTGO, should it not be Vivien? I'd say so. I think this drop was a little too far. We're going to see the roller coaster continue, and it's going to rebound at least a little bit over the coming week. Let's move over to Modern now, where the biggest loser of the week was Horizon Canopy, dropping about a ticket and a half from 21 down to 19.5. And this is just a really good sign for Modern overall. We had more than half a dozen cards gaining at least 2 tickets this week in Modern. None lost as many as 2 tickets. In fact, I don't even have much to say about Horizon Canopy. This is not a greater trend, the price chart isn't still pointing downward, it's just sort of bouncing around at the bottom of its market, which it's been doing for a while. In fact, I'd expect this card to actually rebound a bit once/if the Modern market does improve. Now, the sneak of the week this week is Lotus Petal, that vintage and legacy staple that's actually a little more expensive on MTGO than it is in Paper Magic. It's also one of the rare cards that wasn't really affected by the market crash. It was 10 tickets back in September, it's heading up toward 11 tickets now. And actually, its biggest rally has been over the past week and a half or so. It's jumped from 7 tickets all the way up to about 10.5 and continuing to rise. Historically, this card has really only peaked around the 14 or 15 ticket mark. I think its peak was back in last May, so there's not really a ton of room for it to grow still unless things get really crazy. I just wanted to point out the rally while it was happening because it's significant news, and if you've got any copies of Lotus Petal, you may want to consider selling them into the current spike. As always, we're going to end the week by taking a look at the MTGO Traders sales data over the past 7 days. And this always gives us a really good idea of which cards are selling the most right now, regardless of price increases or decreases. Looking at overall sales by volume, it was another great week for persistent petitioners as well as mono red staples. I'm still looking to pick up about as many petitioners as I can while they're still incredibly cheap, and I'm starting to feel the same way about Skewer the Critics. Skewer the Critics is a really powerful Magic card. It sees a ton of play in Pauper, starting to see a ton of play in Modern, as well as, of course, Standard, and it outsold Lightning Bolt this week for like the 3rd straight week in a row. So again, these cards are commons, they're very cheap right now, but they're going to have a lot of demand both short-term and long-term. In terms of overall sales by price, you're not going to be that surprised at number 1 and 2 this week. It's Surgical Extraction and Arclight Phoenix. Hey, those are the 2 cards I talked about on Gaining Ground. It's correlation that makes sense. Cards are gaining more ground and getting more expensive because people are buying a lot of copies of them and playing them. Hooray! But what about numbers 3 and 4 on this list? Well, number 3 is Hydroid Krasis. Makes a ton of sense. Hydroid Krasis is still the most important card in Standard right now, and it actually gained a couple of tickets this week, shot of about 3 or 4 more tickets, continues to climb. Number 4, though, is Scalding Tarn, the Modern staple that's been stable for months. In fact, not even the crash seemed to really hurt it. Is this really a card that may actually start gaining some value soon? I don't know. I wouldn't bet against it though. It sees a lot of play and it has a lot of demand right now. And that's all I got for you. Thank you so much for joining me. My name is Chaz Andres, and I will see you next Monday morning for another episode of This Week in Magic Online Finance.